Right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's BIOMES talk. My name is Brendan Lewis. I'm a second-year PhD student in the School of the Environment. I'm also a co-lead for BIOMES. If this is your first BIOMES, welcome. BIOMES is YSE's flagship seminar series on all things environmental science. And we have two amazing speakers for you today, and I'll introduce them to you so we can go ahead and get started. Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm are seminar lecturers and research scholars at Yale in the School of the Environment, the Divinity School, and the Department of Religious Studies. They also co-direct the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. Mary Evelyn's concern for the growing environmental crisis, especially in Asia, led her to organize with Grimm a series of 10 conferences on world religions and ecology at Harvard. There were series editors for 10 volumes from this conference, and she co-edited several books, including Buddhism, Ecology, Confucianism and Ecology, and Hinduism and Ecology. After these conferences, she and Grimm founded the Forum on Religions and Ecology. They wrote the book Ecology and Religion, and with Willis Jenkins, they edited Routledge Handbook on Religion and Ecology. There are also series advisors for the Ecology and Justice series at Orbis Books, and they have created 6 online courses for religious ecology called Restoring the Earth's Community. John Grimm teaches courses in Native American and Indigenous religions and world religions and ecology. He has undertaken field work with the Crow and I'm gonna get this.
Apsaloke.
Apsaloke. Thank you. People of Montana and Salish people of Washington State. His published works include the shaman patterns of religious healing among the Ojibwe people, Indians. And with Mary Evelyn Tucker, and he wrote a co-edited volume entitled World Views and Ecology. So help welcome our speakers for today. Thank you.
Nice work.
Thank you so much.
Greetings, everyone. Please join me in a land acknowledgement for the native peoples of this region. We recall the Pequot peoples.
You're speaking out of the mic. Yeah.
And the,
You're speaking
I think I'm on, yeah.
Yeah.
It's wonderful to remember Mohican, Mashantucket, Pequot, Quinnipiac peoples in both their past heritage and their current and contemporary accomplishments and endeavors. How do you know how do you advance?
This way.
Good, when it happens.
While Will is rescuing the technology, I'll just say that there's 2 programs in religion and ecology here at Yale. One is a joint program with our school, Masters of Religion and Ecology with the Divinity School and this school. And the Divinity School now has its own masters as well. This program is actually 17 years old, and it was initiated by our past dean, Gus Beth, who had a tremendous sense that even after his work in the law, he graduated from our law school, he worked with, he founded NRDC, World Resources Institute, but he felt there was a real need for something larger that had values, culture, ethics, and spirituality. So we are going to begin with a big shout out to Eleanor Sterling, who's a graduate of this school and one of the first graduates of the joint program in anthropology and environment. As she spent almost 40 years at the Natural History Museum in New York working on biocultural conservation, which was new, which was interdisciplinary, And she had an enormous impact on the field, including students and so on. And she went just last year to the University of Hawaii Institute for Marine Biology. And regrettably, at a very young age, she just passed away about a month ago. She won the Wilbur Cross Award, which is the highest award for Yale. So we're dedicating this talk in her memory because many of you are now working in interdisciplinary areas. It's not easy. She makes that point. It's not easy. It's been quite a challenge, actually. Religion and ecology, what do they have to do with each other? So Eleanor was a leader, and we feel the line of her legacy. So this promise of eco-spirituality and eco-justice came about, as I just said, in large part because of Gus, Beth, but other people who recognize 85% of the world's people identify with a religion. Now, they have their problems, and they have their promise, we'll say from the very beginning. But this notion that Gus said, science, policy, law, economics, technology, all are necessary but not sufficient for the range of problems that we're facing. And so he said we need this broader spiritual and moral force, which included culture, the arts, environmental humanities, and so on, which are now booming at Yale, and I hope that they'll be more integrated even into our school here. So the overview of our talk, we're going to be defining eco-spirituality and eco-justice. We're going to talk a little bit about our religion and ecology project. We're going to mention, with gratitude, our teacher and cultural historian, Thomas Berry, and Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si, which means praise be. It's had an enormous effect. We're going to speak about indigenous traditions and ecology, which is John's specialty, and we'll conclude with Journey of the Universe, which is a multimedia project, which brings this work into a cosmic Earth human perspective.
Eco-spirituality can be straightforwardly defined as an appreciation for the universe out of which humans and the Earth has evolved. This valuing then of the complexity of Earth and the interdependence of all life systems. So eco-spirituality with both this cosmological and geological emphases. There's obviously many forms of eco-spirituality. Ronald Dworkin's statement opens us up to another perspective. A religious attitude involves moral and cosmic convictions beyond simply a belief in God. That people have an innate and inescapable responsibility to make something valuable of their lives, and that the natural universe is gloriously, mysteriously wonderful. You can sense our emphasis in the religion and ecology program is on the religions of the world, and then the eco-spirituality definition that I gave you, this cosmological and ecological. And here you can see Dworkin moving away from a theism, exclusively theism focus, to a broader, again, the cosmological and ecological. This many emphases then on spiritualities in the plural. Obviously, the many indigenous traditions bring their own perspectives. This is an interesting statement. In Chicago, there's an American Indian Institute, and the elders there, among various native peoples who are gathered in there, who have representations in that city's institution, they gathered to develop a curriculum for handing on to the youth their ideas of their eco-spirituality. And I just highlighted in bold here some of the emphases that they have. Sense of harmony, the collective, the idea of relatives, or the relationship to the earth as relational and relatives, and then a contemporary concern for helping the earth to heal and not simply human-focused or society-focused. So again, eco-spirituality in its many multi-directional.
So environmental justice can be defined in many ways, and fortunately it's gaining traction in our school. There'll be a new environmental justice center, and here we're simply saying it's a response to the unfair exposure of minorities, the poor, and people of color to pollution of air, water, and soil. Now, Robert Bullard is one of the founders of this field. He wrote Dumping in Dixie in the 90s, and this came out of early environmental justice issues in public health. Warren County in North Carolina, an African-American community, was the center of 6,000 trucks of soil with PCBs laced into it. And these people in a very small community got out on the roads and protested that dumping in a toxic waste site. Now, there's a lot to tell between that founding and now, but what I want to put into the equation is that Ben Chavez, who's a great civil rights leader and was connected to the United Church of Christ on these issues, did a paper issued through that church, The Toxic Waste and Race, in '87. And again, the story continues to today because we know we have hundreds of sites in this country, including Flint, Michigan, including Jackson, Mississippi, and certainly including Louisiana and Cancer Alley. So those of you who are working on these issues, there's a lot to do for sure. So out of this movement came in '91 Principles of Environmental Justice, 17 of them. And at this, in '91 People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit in Washington, D.C., that gathered people from all over North America and some from Latin America, it begins. We do hereby reestablish our spiritual interdependence to the sacredness of our Mother Earth, to respect all of our cultures, languages, and beliefs about the natural world, and our roles in healing ourselves to ensure environmental justice. So from the beginning, spirituality and justice were threaded through. Now, social justice, I was hugely involved in the '60s in civil rights movement, went to college in Washington, D.C., and this notion we grew up in a country separate but equal, that's called apartheid, schools, churches, public spaces, separate but equal. It's hard to imagine, but when the voices of religious leaders and community came on board, Martin Luther King, Jesse Jackson, many, many people speaking out about the injustices here, things began to change. And that's what we felt about the environmental movement, that it needed a moral force. So eco-justice, as we're defining it, expands environmental justice with a focus on people to include ecosystems. So we're saying that ecological justice includes social justice and sustainable use of natural resources. It implies seeing nature as intrinsically valuable and a source of human well-being. Now, I don't know if you know, but coming to Yale this semester is one of the great prophetic voices of our society right now. He's considered the new Martin Luther King, and that's William Barber, who has an appointment at the Divinity School. And he is one who's speaking about the polycrises that we're facing, of race, of poverty, of sexism, of militarism, and the environment. He puts these all together in a huge umbrella. I hope you'll have a chance to hear him. He will change Yale, I think, without doubt. So, to conclude this section, we're speaking of the well-being of people and the planet. Humans and nature interconnected, clearly. Destruction of healthy ecosystems is a problem, and human communities, especially minorities, peoples of color, the vulnerable around the world, are suffering from pollution and climate change disasters.
So it's obvious that there's an expansion here of our ethical concern to include eco-spirituality and eco-justice. Thomas Berry made this phrase quite early in the 80s. We have ethics for homicide and suicide and even genocide, but not for biocide or ecocide, geocide. Berry could see on the horizon where we were headed in terms of our industrial economic processes. This influenced our sense as historians of religion of what it is that we could contribute. And so I began in my study of indigenous traditions, and especially the visiting on the Crow Reservation with Apsaloke people, and pictured here are Violin Medicine Horse and Adam Birding Ground. And Adam and Violet adopted us into their family. When that adoption took place, I had the sense as an academic of some enhancement of my field studies. But what they were saying to me was, we are opening the door for you to learn something. To learn something about what it is that we as a people have transmitted in our journey on this continent and our exchange with life in its many forms. And so it was through Adam and Violet and that adoption that the door was opened into ceremonial processes for me. When the Crow undertake a ceremonial, they gather as a people. So just a general slide showing our dear sister and family gathering to prepare a buffalo for a Sundance festival and a Sundance feed after the ceremonial itself. You can see the teepees set up in the background. Crow live in square rectangular houses for the most part, but when their new year comes, they come out 2,000 teepees along the Little Bighorn River. And the gathering of the people, the coming together to accomplish something, a collective sense of eco-spirituality. So this ceremonial that I've entered into 10 times now, the Crow call it Ashkise Lisua. Ashkise is a big lodge. It's a cosmic lodge. Lisua is to dance. What's the cosmic lodge? We're looking at it. They built this lodge every time during the day of the ceremonial that will begin in the evening. Look at the center tree. You notice the buffalo, and above the buffalo, willow branches, water on the reservation. All of the rafter poles from the 12 outer poles are going towards the center. For the Crow, all life is one. But it manifests itself in those two branches going up of that cottonwood tree. And on those two branches are two flags, blue and white, north and south, the winds. So the Crow have a sense of the multiplicity of life, and they are gathering that life. Every one of these poles in this structure is named. This is a living structure for the Crow. So the Ashkise, the big lodge, dancers will go into this, and when they're in, all of the outside will be ringed with shade trees. Trees are leaned against the so that the dancers have some replacement for reprise from the sun, the heat of the day, because they will be here for 3, 4, or 5 days going without food or water. And their intention is to renew the land, to renew the biodiversity, to renew themselves as a people. So it's obvious that I entered into this with a very strong sense of the symbolic character of this religious expression. This life way is the term that I prefer actually to the word religion when I speak of indigenous people, because of that sense of the interwoven character of this life into their daily life. But it was another thing for me to learn that for the Crow people, this was also an act of sovereignty. This was a Crow history that was being presented on the Northern Plains in this ceremonial. And this sense of sovereignty or eco-justice is evident in all of the religious life of the Crow, all of the life way. And it has a direct lineage to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So you can see the word indigenous here. It's a multiplicity of peoples that are being designated by that term, and it's limited and it's problematic usage. But if it leans on this UNDRIP declaration, you can see what it is that the word indigenous can carry in terms of justice.
So my story briefly is I went to Japan in '73, maybe before some of you were born, but I went with a great sense of disillusionment from the US after the Civil Rights Movement, anti-Vietnam War, Nixon's elected. I said I'm not coming back till Nixon is out of office. Unfortunately, that happened when I was at a Zen retreat. And here we have Japan, pristine, beautiful, Mount Fuji. I literally went there 50 years ago this month, just about a week from today. So it's a very powerful place for me because during the years since '73, obviously pollution arose in Japan. So we see Fuji here, but Japan also put its industries overseas and began to create a lot of pollution elsewhere. Now, when I went to China in '85, it was not exactly pristine, but not polluted. The rivers were okay, the cities were breathable and functionable. The agriculture was traditional agriculture. Now you know, I don't need to add to the litany of problems, but the rivers are incredibly polluted, and some don't even reach the ocean, as you know. The cities, everyone who goes to Beijing gets throat and nasal issues, problems. So we can go on, and we're talking about cities, over 100 cities ranging from 30 to 50 million people. Urban issues on steroids, Okay, so I began to look around. I was in Japan 2 years and have been back many times. So I began to study these traditions of this great East Asian country. And clearly Buddhism arose to the fore. Kyoto, I went there almost every weekend. Here's a Zen temple. You can see the rocks like water. You can see the little mountains with moss and so on. Nature. We're meditating, we're contemplating, we're in it. If any of you have been to a Zen temple, it's completely transformative. This is one of the most powerful, beautiful Zen cities in the world. I also became interested in Confucianism because this is a tradition that goes all across East Asia. It's really the cultural DNA of East Asia. It's a tradition which says the individual is related to family, to society, to education, to politics, to nature, and the cosmos. And it is a powerful tradition that's probably influenced more people than any other, except indigenous traditions. We still need to learn more about it. And there's an ecological civilization that China is working on based on these traditions. This is an educational school, and that was what helped modernization in all through East Asia, education. Here's a gate, a torii for a Shinto shrine, and so on. You can see it's on the inland sea of Japan. So for Shinto, this is an indigenous tradition of Japan. The sacred is everywhere. It's marked by this is a gate entering a Shinto shrine, and so on. So there's a powerful sense of the livingness of nature. So here we have then Asian eco-spiritual values. Buddhism, interdependence of life. Confucianism has this fabulous idea, which I did my thesis on, of qi, matter, energy. There's not a dualism here. Even mind, heart is one character. But qi, tai chi, qigong, you're bringing in that energy to the body that's connected to nature and the cosmos, a powerful unifying force. Shinto, we've mentioned already, sacredness of nature. So these nature-based religions are something that we wanted to study in new ways. There are also these eco-justice issues. In graduate school at Columbia, the importance of Asia, especially China and Japan, anticipating its industrialization, its modernization, over 2 billion people wanting electricity, cars, comforts, and so on. That has changed the face of the planet more than almost anything. Americans are still not integrating that because we're Western, European focused and so on. But the rapid and ecological destruction that we saw all across Asia in these last 50 years has been, frankly, heartbreaking because the effect on people, inequities, pollution, the countryside, health issues is enormous. So I felt, along with John, that there was a need for a culturally grounded environmental ethics. It's not going to look like Western religions or philosophy in Asia. These are ancient traditions and have something to offer. So that began our journey to Harvard for these conferences.
So at the Center for the Study of World Religions, we mounted 10 conferences, each individual conferences on particular traditions. And these conferences then resulted in a sequence of volumes. What we intended was to invite to each of these conferences scholars who had shown overt understanding of environmental issues, but many who had no connection to environmental thinking, but their thought tended in that direction, then they accepted the invitation. We also invited environmentalists within these particular religious traditions and scientists who were musical or attuned to the religious traditions. You can see indigenous traditions was a focus, was an incredible 4-day conference, all of them 4 days, but this 4 days of indigenous traditions, the raising of incredible insights from different traditions. Then the Western traditions, Abrahamic traditions, East Asian, South Asian traditions. The effort in these conferences and in the resulting volumes was to explore historical examples where individuals and communities within these traditions had spoken intimately or with insight about local bioregions, about the environment. Most importantly, or as important, I think, were the contemporary critique of these traditions in terms of their voice or their absence of voice in terms of the industrial, technological consumption that was undertaking the planet Earth. So the volumes are very interesting in this regard. They have a sense of a very deep appreciation, also deep critique. We've also maintained an Ecology and Justice series with Orbis books, and you can see the cosmological emphasis top right for you, and also indigenous top left on focus on water, on particular traditions. But in the middle, lower middle, Leonardo Boff's Cry of the Earth, Cry of the Poor, a work that has been very influential on Francis's encyclical Laudato Si. So the resulting Forum on Religion and Ecology, announced at the United Nations in 1998 after the 10 conferences, after 7 follow-up conferences on animals, on nature writing, on a number of projects, largely held in the Harvard area. We developed the Forum on Religion and Ecology to structure an effort to develop the academic field. And that's what brought us to Yale also, the sense of bringing the website here, which will continue at the Environmental Justice Center. This website, which is, carries statements from religious leaders. It carries excerpts from scriptures in these traditions. It also gives some indication of the 16 graduate programs that have now emerged around the country in religion and ecology. Along with the academic focus, we wanted to strongly emphasize the force or religious environmentalism, action on the ground. So engaged projects are listed in the website. We have an eco-justice hub, now also a section on eco-anxiety. And then just to mention also, we've done 6, actually we have 9 MOOCs, 3 on Journey of the Universe and 6 then on these religions and ecology. So much of this we owe to the influence from our teacher, Thomas Berry, a cultural historian. You can see even the titles of some of his work here. He was probing not only the sense of a sacred universe and humans and our dreams, our aspirations, as coming out of the dream of the earth. So he's raising some very interesting imaginative insights here, but especially on your lower left, this call to a great work. So Berry had himself early glimpses into what he would describe as a spirituality and then an eco-spirituality and the justice issues. Though Berry would say, at its core, even our spirituality is earth-derived. The human and the earth are totally implicated, each in the other. If there is no spirituality in the earth, then there is no spirituality in ourselves. It's obvious, isn't it? He's trying to emphasize that bridging in the evolutionary process. If the human has come out of the earth and we see a spirituality in ourselves, there must be in that which we come from, a spirituality of the earth. He also says we can no longer hear the voice of the rivers, the mountains, or the sea. The trees and meadows are no longer intimate modes of spirit presence. The world about us has become an it rather than a thou. His influence on us of this critical take on our times and its economic motivations that have distanced our cosmological values, that have emphasized hyper-individualism and pulled us out of the collective web of our relationship with the earth. So this reciprocity is, I think, what we're seeing as the integration of eco-spirituality and eco-justice. And Berry says it's this renewed sense of reciprocity with nature in all of its complexity and remarkable beauty that can help provide the psychic and spiritual energies necessary for the work ahead. He gave us a clear sense that the environmental movement, not simply data gathering, but the possibility of itself regenerating the human-earth connection. Environmental work itself as generating this work. So these key ideas that come out of Berry, a sacred universe, we dwell in this, living in an earth community, his regard for the sentience of the earth itself. The single sentence that he used to summarize his whole work, namely, the earth is not a collection of objects, but a communion of subjects. Say, interesting phrase we can talk about maybe in Q&A. His call for a great work then, every culture that has enabled this ongoing process, has come to the question of how does it flourish its own future by flourishing the planet itself, biodiversity, land. Those that haven't had that attention, he feels they went by the wayside.
So an example of this integration that we're talking about came about through an encyclical letter of Pope Francis. Now, we know the church has its problems, but Pope Francis is pretty well loved as an authentic human being. And with this encyclical, it has had an enormous effect. This integration of eco-spirituality and eco-justice, especially in that phrase, cry of the earth, cry of the poor, that John mentioned. That came out of Leonardo Boff, the leading liberation theologian in Latin America, putting these things together. And Thomas Berry said to Leonardo years ago, he said, we can't liberate people without healthy ecosystems. They go together. Leonardo got that, and it has influenced liberation theology and is central to this encyclical. So this letter is a broad invitation, really to Catholics around the world, but to Christians, Protestant, Orthodox, and so on, to people of all religions or no religions, spiritual people, seekers. The response of the world's religions has been quite astonishing. And as John said, they had their own statements and so on, but this positive affirmation of this encyclical has elicited one of the greatest movements of interreligious dialogue that we've seen in our lifetime, actually. So they're writing their own statements about this. They're wanting to work with this movement, which is really guided by young people, this Laudato Si movement in all parts of the world. And a film that came out in October called The Letter. You can watch it on the internet. In just a couple months, something like 12, 14 million people had watched it. So we're talking about an influence for this moral spiritual change. The response of environmentalists was also extremely positive. They worked in writing this letter with key scientists from all over the world. The Potsdam Institute for Climate Change Research, Johann Schulenberger, was at the Vatican the day it was announced as a key person. Bill McKibben, who we all know and love as the founder of 350.org, has said many times to us and publicly, this is the most important document of the 21st century. That's amazing from somebody like Bill. So I want to underscore that the first chapter begins with the science. It's what our school is known for. Climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution issues, the food issues, the things many of you are working on. Science is central to this encyclical. It's not preachment, it's not just up in the sky, it's based on what science is telling us. The second chapter, this Gospel of Creation, goes to an eco-spiritual perspective, and it's very poetic, this mystery of the universe, which inspires awe and action. This sense of harmony of creation, certainly in indigenous peoples, but in many traditions, and this interdependence of life. I hope you'll read it. It's quite inspiring. So he has one of the best critiques of neoliberal economics, modernity, and so on in this third chapter. Because he says, what is this instrumental use of nature? Where's the value, the intrinsic value of nature, and so on? Consumerism and materialism, he's saying, the waste we have created that we can hardly manage is creating a filthy earth. It's very strong language. And that market-based solutions are necessary but not sufficient. And I think we all need to pull these things together, all of them, the science and economics and technology and so on. But he's saying something deeper is needed. So his fourth chapter comes to this integral ecology, is the term he's using, and he's highlighting eco-justice with ecology, economics, equity, and ethics for action. And action. The solidarity with the poor is very, very strong, with refugees, people of color, minorities, absolutely central to this encyclical. And importantly, intergenerational justice, eco-justice. So what does this lead to? Eco-justice, climate action from the religious communities. And I would say it's beginning to grow at an exponential rate, which is really wonderful. So churches, synagogues, and so on, measuring their carbon footprint. There's an interfaith power and light group in almost 49 states, I think. Alternative renewable energy, solar and wind, are being used by these communities around the world. Divestment from fossil fuels, started by Bill McKibben and others, $40 trillion now in divestment. Who would have known? $40 trillion. A third of that is from religious communities because they didn't want their pensions involved. And this started years ago with divestment from militarism, tobacco, and so on. So they've been leaders in the socially responsible investment movement. Restoration projects. Communities are restoring forests and rivers, urban areas, cleanup, creating farms and food culture with their churches, their synagogues, and so on. And this advocacy for vulnerable populations that I think we all care about at this school. Again, religions can contribute. They're not alone. They're part of this movement for change. The Glasgow and certainly the Egypt COP conference have had many, many people from the religious communities inside and outside these conferences. And those of you who've gone, I'm sure, have seen these demonstrations and so on. And especially, it's the young, it's religious leaders and communities, and it's indigenous peoples who are leading this moral change movement.
And indigenous peoples bring, despite centuries of oppression, colonial oppression, and ongoing extractive industries, they bring this respect for Mother Earth, a sense of the kinship of life, differentiated sentience. I think this is something we need to think more deeply about as we undertake our work too, and rekindling equitable relationships. So the work of Robin Kimmerer is obviously central in this work, a botanist at the forestry school at the State University of New York, and her wonderful work on braiding sweetgrass weaves then, it is itself an integration of the traditional environmental knowledge and indigenous knowledge and scientific knowledge. She emphasizes the ways of knowing that inspire the protection of nature and humans, eco-justice. So we have seen these examples, Standing Rock, where the Hunkpapa people, Lakota people of North Dakota, stood up to defend water in terms of the water relationship to themselves as a people. Water in itself, they were protecting their kin and defending the sacred. We have other examples now. The Vatican has held a synod in 2019 apologizing to Native peoples. I wanted to include this slide, the contemporary pressures on the Yanomami people, the largest indigenous group in the Amazonian region. The pressures of gold mining and inroads now is incredible. So the sense of what's been preserved by indigenous people is so important. It's really monumental. On the other hand, so much has been lost.
So to conclude, we're going to the universe. Journey of the Universe is a project that was 10 years in the making, and it's this cosmic Earth and human transformation. It was born out of a short essay of Thomas Berry in 1978 calling for a new story. Many people now are calling for new stories. And this was to say we need the evolutionary story which we know for the first time from a scientific perspective. Really, for the first time, that whole story is now available to us, from the great flaring forth down to the minute atoms. So it was an award-winning film. It was on PBS for 3 years. It's a book from Yale Press, podcasts, interviews. The earlier ones were filmed, and now we have more podcasts that Sam King, our project manager for Journey of the Universe, is doing. But the first 10 of those 20 were all scientists, talking about why evolution as a story matters for our sense of belonging and participation in something large, inspiring, and transformative. And we have these classes on Coursera. So the appeal has been wide. Again, I'm not saying any of this is salvific. I'm just saying that young people, students, Sam in particular, has reached out to high school students, and as he taught at Hotchkiss and elsewhere, schools, universities, churches, retreat centers, develop curriculum, which again, the next generation is helping to develop an even more robust curriculum. And audiences in China, it's in Chinese, the book's in Chinese and Korean and Japanese, and about 4 Asian, European languages. But before they pandemic. We went to the Yale Beijing Center and showed it via Zoom, and 77,000 people watched it because it has this sense of cosmology that's in their traditions as well. And we had Confucian scholars respond to it to make that connection between cosmos, earth, and human, which is Confucian and cosmology of science.
So obviously this cosmic eco-spirituality is our effort to expand this understanding to an appreciation for the vast universe out of which earth and life evolved and to which we belong. The sense then of understanding the flaring forth as not some past event, but a cosmogenesis, a present event. It is us. And when we stand on the earth and we see ourselves as part of this earth community, we are not only the problems, we are the work that we need to undertake to address those problems. And that sense then of standing amongst the biodiversity, looking out into the Milky Way and realizing that not only Pogo recognizing the problem is us, but the universe is us. We are what we are looking at too, this understanding.
So, towards conclusion, eco-spirituality and eco-justice. A reverence for cosmos and earth shared by people around the world. A reciprocity for the interconnected life forms, maybe why you came to Yale. A respect for biocultural diversity, like Eleanor Sterling, and a responsibility to next generations. So this picture, Earthrise, as you may know, transformed our generation. For the first time, we could see the Earth from the moon and the trillions of galaxies that we now know are there. This is a life-generating planet. How extraordinary, how awe-inspiring, filling us with gratitude amidst incredible problems. So we have right here on Long Island Sound, beautiful sunsets, sunrises to inspire us, as well the presence of mountains, of rainforests, of rivers, fish and coral reefs, birds now in migration, humans from all over the planet, and future generations looking to us for a sense of change, possibility, and hope.
And this integration of eco-spirituality and eco-justice is opening new language, new rituals, new environmental practices that are themselves orienting us to the cosmos.
And grounding us in Earth's living systems.
Nurturing us constantly with water, air, and food.
And transforming us with the next generation toward a flourishing future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We have time for a few questions. Huh?
You can see we have fun doing this. This has been a lifetime work of 43 years of marriage. Love to have your comments, questions. We're open to criticism too. Yeah, over here, Chris.
For those who want to engage in spiritual practices along the lines of what you're talking about around here, are there institutions or centers or events that you might recommend?
Great question. We've done about 10, 12 conferences here at Yale over the years, but I think people like Rafa and Sam and others from YDS and the chaplaincy programs here can say things that are working against eco-anxiety, on meditation, on rituals, and so on. And this conference that you, Chris, and Riley in front of you organized at the Divinity Center, Divinity School, this past Friday, was among 7 conferences organized over the past years, by far the best, by far inspiring of what young people, sounds condescending, but are doing, including rituals. Sam has the cosmic ritual, the cosmic walk. So I don't know if anybody wants to, Sam, do you want to say anything, Rafa?
Sure, I'm happy to elaborate on that.
Stand up, Sam.
Yeah, thank you for such an inspiring talk, Mary Evelyn and John. And yeah, I would just say I've been really fortunate to work closely with Mary Evelyn and John the last 3 years. They've single-handedly changed my life through all of these ideas they're bringing forth. And The ritual you referenced was a cosmic walk experience that we facilitated on Friday to help people ritually walk through the 13.8 billion year evolution of the universe in a way that sort of mirrors people's own journey through what it took to create the earth and biodiversity across this planet and ultimately ourselves, and to try to evoke that sense of reverence and connectedness. So that's a ritual I've brought forth. I know Rafa had a wonderful program last year on heart-based approaches to eco-anxiety. You're welcome to elaborate on that should you choose, but I'd say there are these really interesting emerging practices that we're, I guess, still co-creating for this particular historical moment.
I find it interesting. Almost every event I go to nowadays, there is attention to the environment and often a cosmological component. By that I mean a sense of either evolving time or situating ourselves in time. We belong to a CSA, a community-sponsored agricultural project, and it's not overtly religious at all, but we show Journey of the Universe at that farm setting, and then they set up telescopes. And it was amazing, people lining up to look at these stars, look at the planets, and then to talk about it in terms of the Journey of the Universe project, trying to draw out that awe and wonder that they were feeling.
Yeah.
Hello, is this on? Okay, cool. All right, thank you. I'm curious, for people who aren't religious and aren't direct descendants from a culture that practices eco-spirituality, so what are your recommendations for how to integrate your eco-spirituality and also avoid like cultural appropriation?
I find Eleanor Sterling a very illuminating example in this regard. Her work at the American Museum of Natural History and then her ongoing work in the islands of Hawaii, where she was emphasizing environmental biocultural studies as themselves generative of the psychological, the energies to go forward. So Eleanor Sterling is, in my mind, and several scientists that we've met also have that sense of drawing on the work that they're doing as generative of the insights that are needed to carry on this work too. So it has this looping feeling.
And I think what we're saying, thank you for the question, is religion and ecology through the forum is evoking change within these traditions, taking from dominion to stewardship and so on, moving things forward. The Journey of the Universe is not attached to any of the, we've wove in some of the ideas of the world's religions, but it's not overtly religious. And as John said at the beginning, Dworkin, one of the great lawyers at NYU, is speaking about a non-theistic sensibility of awe and wonder and beauty. That's available to everyone. Yeah. So that's the point of the opening.
And Holmes Ralston, the ethicist, he explores this fact-value split, which he sees also at the heart of scientific methodology. And he reflects on a restoration ecologist who's looking at a particular ecosystem, and she's trying to determine what's an appropriate restoration pathway. And Ralston was reflecting on that as an ethical opening, an ethical portal, that he sees it's not simply a split, that the science, the work of science itself, is involved in values that have this deeper connotation to, which we're calling then eco-spirituality.
This is why ethics is so important. Just a quick shout out to Ryan Darr, the Institute for Sacred Music, this amazing series they did on extinction, which is all available now, and the continuing efforts up at YDS and the Institute in these areas. Please, Pablo.
Yeah, what an amazing talk. Thank you so much. And I was thinking about the importance of all this work, this framework, and for conservation that has been so much based on market-based approaches and valuing carbon. If the Amazon has a lot of carbon, so let's save the Amazon. If not, let's find other ways to put monetary values. So how do you touch the hearts of people on the table making those big decisions, and how, if you have some examples of some directions that could lead to this broader holistic conservation approaches,
I'd love to give a shout out to Dakila Chungyapa, who was a
McCluskey.
Thank you, McCluskey Fellow here at Yale a few years back, and she has a program at Wisconsin. Wisconsin. She is from a Tibetan Buddhist lineage. She worked with WWF on conservation issues in Southeast Asia. So she's an amazing source. This is not easy, and that's what Eleanor kept saying as well. But I think, and this is where the broader notion of cultural values, cultural stories, integrating with science is arising. Robin Kimmerer's book has sold $1.4 million with no advertising. That is an indication of the interest in the livingness of the universe from TEAK, traditional environmental knowledge, and science. A webinar we did here with the school, with Orion Magazine, Nature Magazine, the Forest School, it was on trees, how trees communicate. 9,000 people signed up for this webinar. See, the sense is emerging in many parts of the world, and we've got to open the doors for it in an integrated way.
I think it's interesting also, Paula, how in some instances where indigenous people have certain perspectives on biodiversity and scientists have their own or another perspective, and they have come to a conversation with one. I don't think all of the issues are resolved, but one of them, for example, in Alaska, the tagging of migrating birds, especially the tagging of youth, and that the local Yupik peoples found that extremely offensive. And in speaking with scientists, they were able to elaborate their position on this act of conservation, and the scientists speaking from their effort to monitor flight and numbers and get an understanding of what's happening with these particular animals. So that has been an ongoing conversation, and it has broken through, I think, one of these hidden barriers, namely TEAK, or traditional environmental knowledge, which has typically been received in the science community and defined by the science community. But here we have indigenous people themselves articulating what they mean. And it's sometimes very different than what the science community understands by TEAK. And so these ongoing examples are really living dialogues in this eco-spirituality, eco-justice issue.
Ecological Society of America, with 10,000 members, is definitely opening the door to these issues. But I want to give another shout out to Amy Vetter, sitting here, along with her husband, Bill Weber, who's done amazing work, incredible work on great ape conservation and so on in Rwanda and elsewhere. But she is musical to this notion that culture matters. Madagascar is a case study with Eleanor, Allison Richards here, and Pat Wright, all women who realized they could not save the the lemurs and so on, without culture and people. And so they created conservation-based areas, but with people involved, as has Amy and Bill, brilliantly.
Thanks, Paul.
Hello, so I have a question. So my background is environmental science, public health. Whenever I'm looking at my research, I kind of explore numbers in public health. So in terms of the number of deaths, the number of people kind of influenced by different types of morbidities, number of people displaced. So in terms of your work and eco-spirituality, how does your work kind of explore this idea of kind of human loss and human displacement due to environmental justice issues and climate justice issues?
One of the most powerful calls that awoke me was reading of a Omaha elder returning to the place that he had been driven out of in the Trail of Tears, and coming back and walking along the streams and feeling an awful intimacy or awful depth of loneliness, the sense of loneliness, of loss, of what it is that he had known in that region. And it certainly was not an it, but it was a community, a life community together. And I feel, Brandon, that the eco-anxiety is one term that's emerging now when we talk about language, that this integration of eco-spirituality and eco-justice is bringing forth language, rituals, practices that awaken us to this sense that you're exploring in your question, this a deep sense of desolation or loss. And how do we speak of hope in the face of that kind of loss?
Such an important question. And I want to give another shout out over to the Climate Communication Center. Here, some people are working hard on this issue. And I think they too are taking seriously the role of humans and what has happened to humans. So it's not only the science that's going to change us. They have stories from different parts of the US and elsewhere.
Ireland of late, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, these are the stories that hopefully will change us. And I think this is what keeps me sleepless at night, the stories of the suffering, the heat in India this summer, the floods in Pakistan, the scorching in China, in many, many parts of the world. To read about this is devastating. So the question is, and maybe I'll give Rafa the last word, because I think we do have to create ways of resilience, methods of resilience, be they spiritual, be they humanistic, be they cultural, and so on. But I think you in the next generation, you can do it. It doesn't have to be connected to traditional religions. But how are we going to create a community of resilience that's intergenerational and inspiring for all of us? That's the task ahead. That's part of the great work. So I don't know, we're at the end, and maybe, can he just make one final comment? Is that all right? Yeah, okay.
Mary Evelyn signing me up to say things. Oh boy. Thank you so much for the talk. It was really inspirational. I don't know how much I have onto that, other than I think I just want to really reaffirm the fact that in this kind of absence of us collectively kind of moving away from a history of religiosity and this kind of really deep inclination of the spiritual but not religious, that's the kind of thing that a lot of folks in our generation are kind of moving towards now, that there is something of a vacuum that maybe some of us are facing of how do we create systems of hope? How do we create our own kind of practices of spirituality? Again, with not appropriating, without leaning into a religion that doesn't feel like ours or we weren't raised in. And there's so much that work that's on our plate now that can feel really overwhelming of, what do we do? How do we face this new world, this new climate, to bring on a new turning of the world that is more integrated with the human and the ecosystems. And that's work that is not ours individually. And I think that's the biggest word for me that I want to, piggyback on, is that this isn't work of me and I, it's us as a community, and what that looks like in conversation and relationship, in partnership and friendship. And that's kind of my take on kind of spirituality, is that this is something that is done within an exchange of wisdom and knowledge and deep listening with the environment, with each other. And from there, I think that's where hope can kind of arise. It's hard to be overwhelmed by climate when we see how much richness there is here at an interpersonal level. So that's what I got, Mary Evelyn.
Thank you.
Thanks,
And
Ralph.
I know that
Good.
we're going to end. I want to just end with this note. A deep thanks for you, for faculty, for students, for administrators of various programs, because this is the first time in 17 years that we have been able to speak about eco-spirituality, or even speak about spirituality at this school. We speak about it all the time outside the school, but this is the change that I hope will happen. It's in your hands: science, ethics, spirituality, and religion. Let's have a weave. Let's figure out a marriage, okay? Thank you so much. Oh.